Hello and welcome to the ScifiCollective podcast. Now this week we're going to talk about one of my favorite things there is in the entire universe. That's right, we're talking about Star Wars, man. Now the films are something that from the day I was born, I lived and breathed by. Star Wars is the thing that I love to death, man. Christianity may be my faith, but Star Wars is my religion. You could ask anybody that knows me, you'll go, yo, what's this guy's favorite thing? They'll say Star Wars is the thing, man. It's just my go-to. I love it. When Force Awakens came out, I was the happiest I've ever been in a long time. I saw it nine times in theaters. I just went all out for it. I bought all the pop figures before the movie even came out. I was just all into it. It's the number one thing. But one aspect of Star Wars I never really paid too much attention to was the expanded universe. I don't know, when I was younger, and I just saw episode 3, I was really into the Clone Wars era, which is still, I think it might be my preferred era of Star Wars, like the Clone Wars and the gap between episodes 3 and 4 are my favorite era. Gotta love the classics, the original trilogy is the best, but I don't know, something about that Civil War period just isn't... I still love it, of course, it's Star Wars, but it just doesn't grab me as much as the other two things I just mentioned. So when I was younger, and I tried getting into the EU a little bit, I don't know, there were just too many to count, really, with what's now considered the Legends books. I tried one that was I don't know, I think it was about pod racing or something on Tatooine. And then another where all I remember is that it takes place immediately after episode 4. And it's about these two kids from Alderaan, and on the cover it was this weird holographic cover of a monster. And the book was something about them landing on Dantooine, which is the name of the planet that Leia claimed the rebel base was at. And so they're on Dantooine, and a monster is stalking them or something. I don't know, this was a decade ago. So that's really all I remember. And neither of those two books appealed to me at all. I thought it was kind of lame. And the fact that there was just so much of the stuff, it just turned me off a lot. And as I grew up and heard about some of the stuff in it, oh, there's a comic where that red droid that blows up in the beginning of episode 4, and because that droid blew up, that's why R2-D2 went with Luke Skywalker. There was a comic of that droid saying how that droid had the Force and stuff. And just stuff like that, also how Boba Fett survived the Sarlacc pit and escaped, whatever. None of that interested me at all. It sounded stupid. So for the longest time, I would refer to the EU as published fan fiction. And you know what? I still feel that way. I think all the Legends stuff, it's great. If you love it, more power to you. I'm glad you like it. It's published fan fiction. I'm sorry. It's just the fact that there's so much of it and that anyone could have just wrote it and published it. And a lot of the stories, from what I hear, contradict each other. It's whatever. It never appealed to me. It never will. Whatever. And even when Marvel released the new Star Wars comic, I think that came out in 2014. It was the September leading up to what's it called? The September leading up to The Force Awakens, or the September the year prior, or something like that. I don't even remember. I saw it. I was like, oh, this is cool, but EU stuff, I don't mess with it. But then when the Lando miniseries came out, I just walked into my comic store and I saw the cover of it, and I was like, oh, this is cool. I love Lando. He never really got that much screen time. So yeah, I'll check this out. So I bought all 5 issues of that mini, and around the time that I was reading that was when the Chewbacca miniseries was coming out, so I read those two simultaneously, and I was like, wow, this is really fucking good. I love this shit. So I started getting all just the comics of it. I picked up the ongoing Star Wars. I picked up the Darth Vader. I got the Leia trade paperback. I got the Shattered Empire comic. And all of it is phenomenal. I'm reading, the Obi-Wan Anakin was really good. The Han Solo one is out now, and it's pretty good. So all the comic stuff I love. And once I realized that the comics were really good, I was like, oh, this is EU stuff. Let me try to get into some of the books. So hit here too. I've read all of the Del Rey books that have come out, with the exception of Aftermath Life Debt, which I'm in the process of reading. And I guess, basically, for one thing, I am very converted. I am now big into the EU, and the more I think about it, the more I realize I'm kind of into these books a little more than I am the films, maybe. I mean, obviously you disregard the prequel trilogy, because that's just awful. I'll probably do another podcast just talking about my opinion on all 7, and then, like, the next week I would do Rogue One or something like that. But anyway, I found myself really digging these books a lot, and kind of, like, they almost feel more like Star Wars to me. I don't know, something like, now when I think of Star Wars, I'm kind of thinking more of the books than I am of the films, which would disgust the version of me from a year ago. But whatever, man, Star Wars is Star Wars. So I guess I'll just quickly go over my opinions of it in chronological order. So Dark Disciple, which takes place in between Episode 2 and Episode 3, is basically like a continuation of the Clone Wars cartoon, which got cancelled once Disney purchased Lucasfilm. And Dark Disciple I just read the other day, and it's one of my favorites, honestly. It's basically Asajj Ventress and a Jedi named Quinlan Vos. They basically just team up and they work to assassinate Count Dooku. And it was really good. I mean, spoiler alert. I mean, you probably know by now all my podcasts are full of spoilers, so whatever, man. You've been warned. It really goes into the dichotomy and the romance between Vos and Ventress. And I love Asajj Ventress. She was my favorite character of the Clone Wars. Well, minus Ahsoka, but, you know, everyone loves Ahsoka Tano. I guess villain-wise, then Ventress was my favorite. If there was an episode with her, I loved it. Just all that Dathomir stuff, I ate it up. Love it. So yeah, Dark Disciple really goes into how they start first just training and working together, then they fall into a romance, and Ventress teaches Vos the way of the dark side, but tries to get him to control it like the Night Sisters do. And it was a lot of stuff like that, and it was just really good. Like, 10 out of 10, would recommend. Definitely read it. Then the Lords of the Sith book, which is right after Revenge of the Sith. It's advertised as Darth Vader and Palpatine crash land on Ryloth, and basically all these rebels are hunting them. And while that does happen, that's more of a secondary story. The main plot is that there's a free Ryloth movement. The Ryloth is the home planet of the Twi'leks, those aliens with, like, the tails on their head. And it's basically about Cham Syndulla, who was in the Clone Wars cartoon, him leading this rebellion. And it was really nice, kind of, for one thing, you start to see, like, seeds in the birth of the rebellion movement. Kind of like how, while they're doing it, they're just going on about, yeah, we need to keep this on Ryloth, you know, make sure we succeed here. But saying, you know, this will inspire rebellion throughout the galaxy. That's the main goal. Yeah, we want to free Ryloth, but this is going to spark something bigger. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than me. So all that stuff was really cool to see. And it was also really cool to see more of the relationship between the Emperor and Vader. Because, you know, in the films, you don't really get much. Like, in Revenge of the Sith, yeah, we learn of how Palpatine seduced Anakin and got him to turn. But you don't really see them at all in Empire. It's just that one dialogue they have via hologram. And then even in Return of the Jedi, like, yeah, the Emperor is there, but you don't really get to know what Vader and the Emperor are like. And that's another good thing that the Darth Vader comic really gets into. But yeah, with the Lords of the Sith, it goes into that a lot, and you basically just kind of see, like, Vader struggling with himself versus his past, because a bunch of his past memories and relationships start springing up on him, and he's like, oh, maybe I fucked up a little, I don't know, You know, a lot of people shit on this book for whatever reason, but I'm a big fan of it. I mean, you know, with the exception of Battlefront, Twilight Company, and the first Aftermath, I'm going to say it's one of my favorites, because I think, with the exception of those two, all these books are pretty much perfect. Which brings us to our next one, Tarkin, which is just about, you know, Grand Moff Tarkin, seeing him go from childhood to how he became Grand Moff and to run the entirety of the Death Star. It's basically, it's woven between a present-day plot and flashbacks of his childhood, which is really cool to see. He was born on some outer rim planet that was really anarchic, that's the word. It was full of lawlessness, let's go with that. I can say that word. It's such a lawless planet, and, it's all these gangs and crime syndicates are running it. So he basically just trains with his uncles in the woods, essentially, just killing wild animals for food, just all this weird stuff that he's doing to become the man that he becomes. And that was really cool to see. Now, I haven't seen the Rebels TV show yet. I've seen, 2 episodes. I saw, that hour-long intro movie thing, and then I saw 1 or 2 other episodes. And from what I've seen, it's good. It's just, I haven't had the ability to get into it, because the only place, I don't want to drop $30 for the Blu-ray of a show I haven't even seen yet. So the only way I could find it is on Kiss Cartoon, that buffers every 5 minutes, so I kind of gave up on it, but I'll probably just jump in with Season 3. But the next book, A New Dawn, is about Hera Syndulla and Kanan, who are the 2 of the main characters on the show. And it's really just, it's them on this planet. There's a planet and its moon, Cinda. I don't remember the planet's name, but I remember the moon. And basically, that is this huge mining operation. And it's just about them basically going from rebels without a cause kind of thing, just looking out for themselves, to actually kicking the Empire out of the system and all that. It's really cool to see Kanan, even though I don't really know him because I haven't seen the show as much. It's cool to see how he, became, what his deal is, which he also, there's a comic of him too that I haven't read yet. I think it's only 12 issues. I'm just gonna get the 2 paperbacks and get around to reading it. But basically, he was just like a youngling Padawan when Order 66 happened, but he escaped. And up until now, he really hid his Jedi powers in the Force. He's just trying to stay hidden, do what he needs to do. He's just bouncing around system to system, planet to planet, every few months, it seems. So it's really cool to see his character go from that kind of guy that just is looking out for himself to then becoming a rebel. It actually reminds me a lot of Han Solo's story, now that I think about it. So that's really good. Then Heir to the Jedi, which takes place immediately after New Hope. A lot of people, from reviews I've read, they shit on this book a lot, but I thought it was really, really good and really interesting. It's basically just Luke and this other girl, Nakari, I believe her name is. I might be misremembering that, but I think Nakari or Nakara was her name. It's basically just the 2 of them. They team up to go rescue this really high-ranking hacker. She was basically just under Empire control, kind of not so much like a prisoner in what we think of, but she was essentially a prisoner and forced to work for the Empire. And what I really like about the book, that a lot of people shit on for it, is that it's from Luke's perspective. Every EU book is in third-person perspective, where it's he says, she says, they say, whatever. But it was all from Luke's point of view, and you get to really get into his mindset. And from what I've read about the author, really, his reasoning for wanting to write the book is that it made no sense to him how in A New Hope, when all he gets is a little bit of lightsaber training with Ben, how then in Empire Strikes Back he suddenly has a pretty good handle on the Force and can use Force pull and all this stuff. So he basically said, that doesn't make sense, let me write a story explaining how he does that. And throughout the book you see Luke training and trying to get with the Force, and eventually at the tail end of the book he finally is able to start levitating stuff. I don't know, that's just a really interesting story to me that I was into. But next is Battlefront Twilight Company, which everyone raves this book. I am definitely in the minority here when I say I'm not a fan. In all these, I was even able to get through Aftermath after 3 attempts at getting through it, but this I could not get through. I stopped after about 50 pages or so. It's basically just, it's also in between New Hope and Empire. It's basically just about this battalion of rebels doing stuff. It reads very much like a war novel, and it's really just a war story straight up. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe as the book progresses it changes, but it seems that that's all it is. And if you're into that, great, I applaud you, more power to you. That's just not the kind of thing I'm into. I mean, I know it's called Star Wars, but I care more about the star and more about the Force than I do about the war. I mean, that's just me, but whatever, man. And then up next is Aftermath, which was the first book from the EU that I read. It was given to me for my birthday back in September of 2015. And my sister was just like, oh, you like Star Wars? And I heard of this. Here you go. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And I read like a third of it and then stopped. Then a few months later, read a tenth of it and then stopped. Then I only finally just made myself read it. And everyone shits on this book too, but to its credit, it's not awful. It's just those first two attempts, just life was getting in the way of life. You know, it was my first year of college, and I was doing all these classes, and I just got a girlfriend, and, you know, I'm in all these clubs and doing all this stuff, so just life gets in the way of life kind of thing. And while it's certainly one of the weaker of the new stuff, it's really not bad. I think it's basically just about this it's not even about a battalion of rebels. It's about like 5 random individuals meeting up and deciding, alright, we're gonna do this thing. And I think that's really its problem, is that in order to get into it, you have to trudge through all this stuff where just chapter after chapter after chapter, it just bounces between all these characters that you've never met before. And I don't know, I guess the plot of the book is that after the destruction of the second Death Star, a bunch of high-ranking Empire people are like, alright, we gotta get together and figure out what the fuck we're gonna do. And when the book actually focuses on that stuff, it's really interesting. I know that, the politics of the prequel trilogy was its downfall, and is why it's so damn unwatchable. But that's, like, something I'm really into in general. Like, that's why I love Star Trek so much. That's why Deep Space Nine is the best Trek there is, because all it is politics, 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 politics. So when we get into seeing them try to fix the Empire and see what they're really going to do with it, it's really interesting. But there's all this other stuff you gotta get through, and there are all these interludes of, like, it's not a chapter, it's an interlude, where they'll go for, like, 4 pages of some random thing happening that has nothing to do with anything. And it's just like, okay, it's just stuff you gotta get through. I'm only, like, 75 pages into Life Debt, and it's a lot better, mainly because, like, the gang is together, I guess you could say, so you don't have to go through all this ping-ponging stuff. And it's just, the story's progressing normally as a story. But one thing about Aftermath that I really like, and what makes me like this new canon a lot more than even the concept of the Legend stuff, is that with the Legend stuff, like I said before, anyone can just make it, anyone could write it, anyone could publish it, it's whatever. And they don't really have to consult the older work that much, because, you know, stuff ends up contradicting itself. But with this stuff, it seems like they have a general plan, if not thinking, okay, well, we know we're going to make these 50 books from now till the end of the time, kind of like what Marvel and DC are doing with their movies. They know what they're doing, and it seems like, being that it's all from one publisher, and it's under the Disney Lucasfilm banner, it sounds to me like they're making sure nothing contradicts, and they're making sure that things line up. Like, in A New Dawn, the main Imperial is this woman named Ray Sloan, and now in Aftermath, she's an admiral. She's the admiral. It's Admiral Ray Sloan, and she's, like, the main character here again. So just seeing that kind of stuff where it's like, oh, you know this character? Well, here she is again. You know, it's like, I don't watch Empire Strikes Back, and then when I put in Return of the Jedi, it's a whole new cast of characters. No. It's one universe, it's one story. Give me some continuity. And that's what Aftermath provided, is some continuity. Which is very nice. So, I mean, I'll give it that. Ultimately, Aftermath itself is a little weaker, but I'd say just read it because you need to get to Life Debt kind of thing. Because so far, Life Debt is very interesting. But then, finally, we have Star Wars Bloodline, which is hands down my favorite new book of the EU. Excuse me. Is probably one of my favorite Star Wars installments after Force Awakens, Empire, and New Hope. It's just phenomenal. It's politics galore, essentially. It takes place, like, I think 5 years before Force Awakens happens, and it's really just seeing Leia as a senator in the New Republic. And that's one criticism I get of Force Awakens, even though there are no criticisms of The Force Awakens. It's a perfect film, it's phenomenal, and I love it. But another conversation, another podcast. One thing I do get is how we don't know anything about the New Republic in the film, and it's like, oh, the Hosnian system blew up? Okay, that happened. Which I get, because we don't know anything. It's just, oh, the New Republic's here. No, it's not. Because that's one thing the film failed to do, is really explain what's the New Republic versus the Resistance versus the First Order. It's one thing the film didn't really explain, and Bloodline and the Poe Dameron comic, which I'll talk about in a sec, those two really explain it and make it crystal clear what's the political situation. So it's basically Leia in the Senate of the New Republic on the Hosnian system, Hosnian Prime, so we actually know what that means now and care about it. It's basically her dealing with the fact, like, the Senate itself is crumbling almost, kind of like our own Senate. She just sees it how the political gap between the populists, which are people that want, like, each planet to run its own affairs kind of thing, and the centrists that are basically like, no, we need a central government. Then why else would we have the Senate? What's the point of a republic if everyone's independent? Which makes sense. It's really mainly about that. And you just get to see all the politics of everything. You get to see what the New Republic's like. You get to see what the factions are kind of like. It seems like most of the centrists are like these empire worshippers almost. So that's really cool. And you do begin to see the birth of the First Order, which is nice. One of the really side characters that for the first 3/4 of the book you don't really even need to pay too much attention to. You find out that ultimately she was trying to build the First Order a little bit. And there ends up being one point when Leia's on this mission that she kind of stumbles upon what she doesn't know yet, but is the beginning of a First Order kind of army sort of thing. And all that's really nice to see. It's just really good book. I'm not giving it nearly enough justice, but 10 out of 10 would recommend, hands down. Go out and buy it. So then I guess, lastly, that would bring us to the Poe Dameron comic, which I get the criticisms of, but personally I think is still a really good book. It's basically just, how did Poe Dameron find the guy at the beginning on Jakku of The Force Awakens, Lor San Tekka? How did he track him down, is essentially what it is. And it's just, the first arc is kind of weird because it ends up with this group of people that have an egg and it hatches into a dragon, which makes no sense, but you know what? Whatever. It's Star Wars, you get to see Poe Dameron in action, which, as much as I love Poe Dameron, and as he kind of is like the breakout star of Force Awakens, he's not in the movie. I'm sorry. He's there in the beginning, and then he shows up at the end so he could fuck Finn. But that's really all. He's not, you don't get to see him that much. It's, it is what it is. But now he has his own book, so it's nice to see him in action. So just that and Bloodline are really nice to have, just because I think, like I said before, I love the gap, the period between Episode 3 and Episode 4, because you have that big gap there, and I want to see, like, what was life like there. I'm really hoping that a lot of the EU books bridge the gap between Jedi and Force Awakens, because it's a 30-year gap, and Force Awakens didn't really do a whole lot to explain it. Like, now we know that the New Republic is, like, the official government. The First Order is basically not in power. The First Order is essentially the rebellion. the roles kind of flip-flopped now. And the Resistance, which is another really cool thing about Bloodline, is at the very, very end of the book, like the last chapter, essentially, you see Leia begin to build the Resistance, and that's the military, essentially. I think it's implied that the New Republic has a military, but it's not big, it's not really that powerful or anything. They don't go too much into detail on it. But the Resistance, as of Bloodline, isn't official. It's kind of more like an underground side operation kind of thing, which I guess makes sense, because in Force Awakens, when Hux gives that speech about, like, you know, when they're on Starkiller Base and he gives that Hitler-like speech, he says something along the lines of, "The New Republic lies to the galaxy by supporting the loathsome Resistance," I think is the line. And I guess the point is that the Resistance, while it's a military and it's pro-New Republic, it's not official, it's not recognized, is what I think they're getting at. And Poe Dameron kind of, the comic series Poe Dameron contradicts that a little bit, because in the comic it seems like it is official. However, he only ever communicates with Leia. So I don't know. Again, that's one thing Del Rey and Marvel have to get on, is, you know, explaining more so what's happened in this 32-year time jump we did. So that being said, that's all of them. What's it called? Excuse me. It's not all of them. There are some young adult novels in it, but I don't think, like, yeah, they count. It's canon, but I'm not really into it. Like, I read the first 200 pages of Lost Stars and gave zero fucks about it. It was awful. And the other ones, they seem kind of more like just one-offs of like, oh, this is Luke Skywalker's adventure. This is a Han Solo adventure. So I don't feel obligated to read it as much as I do feel obligated to read these. However, in October, when the Ahsoka young adult novel comes out, I will read that, and probably will do a whole podcast on it, just because Ahsoka Tano, one of my favorite Star Wars characters ever. So you gotta share the love, gotta support her. You know how it goes. So then I think in the next one we're getting by Del Rey, by the grown-up books, quote-unquote, is Catalyst, a Rogue One story, which I guess is a prequel to the prequel. So I guess it's like, oh, a week, so there's A New Hope, then a week ago, Rogue One, then a week before that, Catalyst, whatever. That happens, and then about mid-January is when the end of the Aftermath trilogy, Aftermath, Empire's End, comes out, which that I'm excited for, just because I heard the Battle of Jakku takes place in that book, which, just seeing all that imagery on Jakku in the beginning of Force Awakens, it makes my nerdgasm come out, and made me come every night, all 10 times that I've seen the film. I came like 3 times during those scenes, so now I want to see what the battle actually was like. So when that book comes out, and I've had a chance to read it and digest it, give out a review of that. And maybe once I'm done with Life Debt, I'll send out like a quick 5 or 10 minute podcast on that. I don't know. But yeah, so that's that for now. I'm going on vacation this upcoming week, so I can't guarantee if I'll have a podcast for next week. If I do, it'd probably be a more short, dumb one that I do with me, my brother, and my cousins kind of thing. Like, a little bit different from what I usually do. But then the week after that, I'm going to start up. I think from now on I want to do 2 podcasts. So I want to do whatever it is I feel like doing. And then every Wednesday do like a comic review on just my pull list of that week. And then once I finally get back to college at the end of August, I think I'll start bringing guests onto the show. So I think that'd be a little more interesting and maybe a little more comedic, whatever. If I have someone else to play off of and you get to hear more than one terrible voice for a half hour in a row. Yeah, I don't know. I think just having a guest star or whatever would just be more fun to do for me in general. But for now, it's just gonna be the same old, just me, until then. So, yeah, I'll talk to you guys later.